I don't need to say anything more. The judge's words echoed in the silent courtroom. Just minutes earlier, Liam had stunned everyone in the room. With a firm yet emotional voice, the 10-year-old stood up in the middle of his adoption hearing and boldly declared, "They love us, and I love them. If I had one wish, I would just want to be loved by these people for the rest of my life." The room fell silent, as if everyone was holding their breath. Then, the judge smiled, and everything changed. The gavel came down. Applause erupted. Emma Patterson broke into tears, hugging her two sons tightly. After years of waiting, after trials and tears, her family was finally whole. But what had brought them to this moment? What had made a boy, who had lost all faith in the world, stand up and speak words that left the courtroom speechless? Let's rewind and discover this emotional story. 3 years ago, Emma and her husband, David, welcomed a 3-year-old boy named Ethan into their home. The little boy was thin, clutching an old teddy bear, the only thing left from his past life. He didn't cry, didn't speak, just quietly withdrew into the corner of the room. Emma didn't force him. She was patient, gentle. Each day, a little at a time, she created a sense of safety for Ethan. Then one night, the little boy whispered in the dark, "Mom, can I hug you?" Emma was stunned. She knelt down, opened her arms, and replied, "You can hug me as many times as you want." That was the moment Emma realized she would never let go of this boy. But little did she know, the journey ahead would prove even more challenging than she had imagined. Yet, Ethan's eyes always carried a sadness that could not be erased. One night, he quietly cried and said, "I miss my brother, Liam." Emma's heart caught in her throat. She knew about Liam, Ethan's biological brother, who had been separated from him when they entered the foster care system. They had been apart for many years but had never stopped thinking about each other. Ethan's small words that night changed everything. Emma made a vow. She would bring Liam back, no matter the cost. But how could she convince the foster care system to reunite the two brothers? What challenges awaited them? And would this journey end with a real family? Stay tuned, because this heartfelt story still has many surprises in store. If you feel this story touches your heart, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more emotional stories and join us in spreading the message of love. 3 years ago, when Emma Patterson and her husband, David, decided to become foster parents, they had no idea that their lives were about to take an irreversible turn. They were not a wealthy couple, did not own grand mansions, nor did they have bank accounts overflowing with money. But they had something far more important, an open heart and boundless patience to love children who had lost their trust in the world. That day, the sky poured down a light rain, accompanied by the sharp cold that brushed against their skin. Emma pulled her coat tighter around her, stepping quickly into the social services center where she and David would meet the first child they were about to bring home. They had prepared themselves for this day for months, but even now, her heart pounded in her chest, not out of fear, but something bigger, responsibility. Inside the waiting room, everything was eerily quiet. The gray-white walls, with their old, faded frames hanging idly, seemed like forgotten memories of the hundreds of children who had passed through here. She glanced around, catching the eyes of a few children sitting on nearby benches. Some sat silently, eyes fixed on the floor, while others watched her with wary eyes. No one smiled, no one spoke, just the heavy silence that filled the air. David gently touched her hand. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice soft but betraying his concern. Emma took a deep breath and nodded. The door before them opened. A social worker stepped in, followed by a small boy with dark curly hair, clutching tightly to a worn-out teddy bear. The boy stood no taller than Emma's waist, thin and looking smaller than his actual age. He didn't run into their arms like children often do in heartwarming adoption movies. There was no smile, no joyful cries of "Mom, Dad." He simply stood there silently, his deep black eyes staring straight at her without blinking. Emma felt a cold chill run down her spine, not out of fear, but from something deeper, a pain that the boy hadn't spoken of but was clearly reflected in his gaze. "This is Ethan," the social worker said, trying to sound cheerful, though her voice was tense. "Ethan is 3 years old, but due to his family circumstances, he has been placed in 3 different homes in the past year." 3 homes? 1 year? Emma felt her throat tighten. She slowly knelt down to be at Ethan's eye level, trying not to make him more afraid. "Hello, Ethan," she said in the gentlest voice she could muster. The boy didn't respond. He didn't nod. There was no reaction. David also crouched down, speaking softly. "Do you like any toys? We can get you a new teddy bear." At this moment, for the first time, Emma saw a small reaction. Ethan gripped his old teddy bear tighter, as if afraid someone might take it from him. The social worker sighed, turning to explain, "This teddy bear is the only thing Ethan brought from his first home. It's the only thing left from his past." Emma felt a powerful surge of emotion in her chest. A 3-year-old child had gone through so much loss that he had to cling to a worn-out toy as the last anchor in his life. She gently extended her hand. "I won't take it away, Ethan. I promise." The boy remained silent, but this time, Emma could see his small hand loosening just a bit. David stood up and turned to the social worker. "Can we take him home today?" The social worker seemed surprised. Usually, foster parents need some time to get to know the child before taking them home. Emma tightened her grip. "We're ready. And I think Ethan needs a place to call home." A brief silence filled the room. Then, finally, the social worker nodded. "All right, I'll finish the paperwork right now." Emma stood up and looked down at Ethan. "Would you like to come with us, Ethan?" Ethan didn't say anything, but this time, he slowly reached out his small fingers, grasping the hem of her coat. A soft touch, but to Emma, it was a sign of a new beginning. She looked at David, and in their eyes, no words were needed to understand one thing. This moment marked a turning point in their lives, and they were ready for whatever came next. But little did they know, a bigger secret awaited them ahead, a past that Ethan had never spoken of, and someone he had never forgotten. Ethan was only 3 years old when he entered Emma's home, but his eyes held no trace of the innocence of a child. He wasn't eager to explore the new house, nor was he curious about the toys laid out in the room. The small boy stood there silently, clutching an old teddy bear as if it were the only thing keeping him connected to a world that had been taken from him. Emma and David tried their best not to do anything that might scare him. They quietly observed, giving him the space to adjust. The house, usually so warm, suddenly felt eerily silent. Ethan's small footsteps were so light they barely made a sound. He moved silently, not touching anything, not asking any questions, not looking directly at anyone. He seemed like a small shadow drifting through everything, existing but not truly present. Emma had read many materials about traumatized children, but now, witnessing it firsthand, she realized that the words on paper couldn't fully convey the pain behind a child who had endured so much loss. She didn't know exactly what had happened to Ethan in the first 3 years of his life, but it was clear that it had left a wound too deep in his young soul. Their first dinner was held in a heavy atmosphere. Emma had prepared a simple meal of mashed potatoes, chicken nuggets, and a warm glass of milk, foods fit for a child. But Ethan didn't eat immediately. He sat on the chair, still holding the teddy bear tightly. He didn't ask for food, nor did he move, as if he couldn't believe he was actually allowed to have this meal. "It's okay, Ethan," Emma said softly. "You can eat whenever you're ready." Ethan looked up at her, but not for long. His gaze quickly drifted away, returning to the distant, unfocused state it had been in. David frowned slightly, but Emma motioned for him to remain quiet. She knew the change wouldn't come immediately. An hour later, as they were finishing cleaning up, they turned around to find Ethan had fallen asleep at the table, his head resting against the arm of the chair. The plate of food was almost untouched. Emma gently lifted the small boy up, feeling his thin body, light as air, in her arms. He didn't react, didn't resist. When she laid Ethan down in bed, Emma was about to pull the teddy bear away to tuck him in, but immediately, Ethan's small hand gripped it tighter, as if the entire world would collapse if she took it away. Emma paused. She sat down next to the bed, quietly observing the boy. Ethan's breathing was even, but his eyelids twitched lightly, as if he was dreaming something unpleasant. His small hand never loosened its hold on the teddy bear, not even a little. Emma's throat tightened. What had this boy gone through to become like this? Outside, the rain began to fall, each droplet tapping softly against the window pane, creating a melancholic melody. Emma gently stroked Ethan's soft hair and pulled the blanket up to cover his small shoulders. "Good night, my love," she whispered, knowing full well he wouldn't answer. But before she stood up, Emma noticed something small yet profound, a single tear running down Ethan's cheek. He was still asleep, but his tiny body trembled slightly, as if even in his dreams, he couldn't escape his pain. Time passed, but Ethan's silence remained unchanged. He lived in his own world, a world where he neither spoke nor laughed and never actively reached out to anyone. Each day, Emma would gently greet him in the morning, prepare delicious meals, and read stories to him before bed. But Ethan only watched silently, sometimes nodding lightly, sometimes curling up in a corner, clutching his old teddy bear as if it were the only thing that made him feel safe. David sometimes grew concerned. "Do you think he's okay?" he asked one evening as the couple cleaned up after dinner. "He still won't talk to us. I'm not sure if we're doing something wrong." Emma wiped her hands on the dish towel, her gaze fixed on the hallway where Ethan had just walked into his room. "There's nothing wrong, David," she responded quietly. "We just need to give him time. He's been through so much already." David sighed, saying no more. The following days passed in much the same way. Ethan remained a small shadow in the house, present but not truly connected to anyone. But Emma didn't give up. She didn't force him, didn't ask questions that might pressure him. She patiently waited, waiting for the moment Ethan would realize he was no longer alone. Then, one cold autumn evening, a miracle happened. That day, Emma had just turned off the living room light and was about to head upstairs to bed when she felt a gentle tug at her shirt. She spun around, startled. Ethan was standing there. He was still holding his teddy bear, but this time, there was something different in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation, and expectation mingled with fear. He bit his lip, then whispered, his voice so soft it was almost inaudible. "Mom, can I hug you?" Emma froze. Her heart began to race in her chest. This was the first time Ethan had reached out to her. She knelt down, opening her arms, saying nothing, just waiting. Ethan hesitated for a second. Then, as if a wave of emotion had broken, the little boy threw himself into her arms, wrapping both arms around her neck as though afraid she would disappear. Emma held him tightly, feeling the small, trembling warmth of his body in her arms. For the first time, she could feel Ethan's heart beating fast, like a little bird escaping the cage of its fear. "It's okay, my love," she whispered gently, stroking his back. "I'm here. I won't go anywhere." Ethan didn't respond, but Emma felt her shoulder grow wet. Warm, silent tears fell down. She didn't know how much pain, how many unsaid things this little boy had been holding inside. But in that moment, she knew that this moment was a turning point. An invisible wall had come crashing down. Emma held him a little longer, feeling his breathing slow, his heartbeat steady. The trembling stopped. For the first time, Ethan had found a place to lean on, and Emma understood that this boy needed her more than she could have ever imagined. Though Ethan had slowly begun to open up to Emma, something still remained unchanged. He smiled more often, started answering simple questions, and at times would run to hug her after a long day. But no matter how joyful he seemed, there was one thing Emma couldn't help but notice: the sadness that lingered in his eyes. There were moments, fleeting but unmistakable, when the family would be having dinner, and Ethan would suddenly pause, staring off into the distance as though his mind had been pulled back to a place no one could reach. There were nights when Emma woke up to a small sound coming from Ethan's room, only to find him sitting on the bed, wide-eyed, staring up at the ceiling in the darkness, his teddy bear still clutched tightly in his small hands. Emma had never asked Ethan about his past. She knew that painful memories couldn't be forced to surface. But every time she saw that look in his eyes, she couldn't help but wonder what he had been through to become a child who carried such deep sorrow within him. Once, when Emma and David took Ethan to the park, they stopped at the swings. Children were running around, their laughter filling the air. David lifted Ethan and placed him on an empty swing, but instead of laughing like the other children, Ethan quietly gripped the chains, staring at the other kids without saying a word. Emma knelt down beside him, softly asking, "Ethan, don't you want to play on the swing?" Ethan looked up at her, his dark eyes reflecting confusion. After a moment, he quietly replied, "I used to play with my brother." The words hit Emma like a punch to the gut. "My brother." She exchanged a glance with David, but her husband remained silent, unsure of how to respond. This was the first time Ethan had mentioned anyone from his past. Emma sat down beside him, keeping her voice as gentle as she could. "Which brother, sweetie?" Ethan looked down, his small hand tightening around the chains. After a long silence, he whispered, "Liam." A gentle breeze brushed past them, but within Emma, a storm had just erupted. She had read Ethan's file, but it hadn't mentioned much about his family. And now, for the first time, Ethan had revealed an important piece of his life. He had a brother. Why had no one ever mentioned this before? Where was Liam? Why were they separated? And most importantly, how long had Ethan been carrying this longing? Emma's chest tightened. She looked at the small boy before her, a child who had endured so much pain to the point of not being able to speak about the only family he had left. She knew she had to uncover the truth, but was she ready to face what awaited her? One night, while Emma was gently tucking Ethan into bed, she softly pulled the blanket up over him, her gaze tenderly following his small face as it relaxed after a long day. She thought that Ethan had fallen asleep, but just as she was about to stand up, a small voice broke the silence in the dark, weak but full of emotion. "I miss Liam." Emma froze. Her hands instinctively paused midair, her heart skipping a beat. She wasn't sure if she had heard it right, but Ethan's voice was so clear. She stayed still, not wanting to react too quickly and risk making him withdraw. This was the first time he had actively mentioned someone from his past. She lowered her voice, gently asking, "Who is Liam, sweetie?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He curled up a little, clutching his old teddy tightly, as if it were the only part of a fragile memory he was afraid would disappear at any moment. His eyes turned to the ceiling, distant and vague, as though the images in his mind were drifting back to a time long past, a place only he could see. After a while, he whispered so softly that Emma had to lean in close to hear. "He used to push me on the swing. He always hugged me when it rained. He said he wouldn't let anyone take me away." Emma felt a cold chill run down her spine. These weren't just casual memories. They were pieces of an incredibly important bond that Ethan had lost. A 3-year-old child couldn't invent things like this. That meant Liam wasn't just a brother. He was the only support, the last shield protecting Ethan in a cruel world he had once lived in. But now Liam was gone. Emma gently touched Ethan's small hand, feeling the coldness radiate from his tiny fingers. She tried to keep her voice as calm as possible. "Where's Liam now, sweetie?" Ethan flinched, his eyes filled with confusion, as though Emma had accidentally touched a wound that had never healed. Suddenly, fear surged in his eyes. Ethan shook his head repeatedly, his body shrinking back in a defensive reflex. "No, no, don't talk about it. Don't talk about it." His voice was frantic, trembling, his breath growing erratic as if he had just remembered something terrifying. Emma immediately realized she had gone too far. She quickly rubbed Ethan's back gently, trying to calm him. "It's okay, Ethan. I won't make you talk. I just want you to know you can tell me anything when you're ready." Ethan didn't respond. He remained trembling, burying his face in the teddy bear, his small hand gripping it so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Emma's heart ached. This wasn't just a feeling of longing. Ethan was terrified to speak about Liam. Something had happened, something so horrible that it had made the boy who had once trusted his brother the most afraid to even mention his name. She sat there, looking at the small boy curled up like a bird caught in a storm, her mind filled with 100 unanswered questions. She knew she needed to find out about Liam. She couldn't let this fear continue to haunt Ethan. But how? She looked at the little boy for a long time, then gently stroked Ethan's hair, feeling his small body begin to relax in her arms. His breathing grew steady, a sign that he had drifted into sleep. But on his tiny cheeks, the tears were still there, lingering. Emma stayed by Ethan's side for a long time. She couldn't sleep that night. Over and over in her mind, one question repeated itself. "Where is Liam?" Emma couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's whispered words from that night. The name Liam repeated in her mind like a question without an answer. Who was Liam? Why did Ethan seem so afraid when mentioning his brother? And most importantly, where was Liam? The next morning, while Ethan was still sound asleep, Emma quietly went to her office. She sifted through the paperwork provided by the foster care system when they first adopted Ethan. She remembered reading every page carefully before bringing him home. But at the time, she hadn't noticed any mention of a brother. She opened the file carefully, scanning through each sheet: date of birth, health history, reasons for entering the system. Everything was familiar until she came across a name she hadn't noticed before: Liam Carter. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She quickly turned more pages, trying to find more information about Liam. According to the records, Liam was Ethan's older brother, 7 years his senior. The two had been placed into foster care together, but soon after, they were separated. Ethan was moved to a different family when he was just 3 years old, while Liam was sent somewhere else, with no specific notes about where he had gone. Emma sat frozen, trying to process what she had just read. The brothers had been torn apart when Ethan was too young to remember everything. But for Liam, who had been 10 at the time, this was undoubtedly a wound that would never heal. And if Ethan still remembered and spoke of his brother after all these years, it meant their bond was incredibly deep. Emma couldn't help but picture the scene of the two children being pulled apart in tears. A promise had likely been made, perhaps that the older brother would protect his younger sibling, never letting anyone take him away. But in the end, fate had cruelly torn them apart. She took a deep breath. She knew she couldn't let Ethan grow up without knowing about his brother. But how could she find Liam? The foster care system was a bureaucratic maze full of barriers. Accessing information about a child who had been through the system wasn't easy, especially when the child had been moved to different homes. But Emma also knew that if anyone in this world wouldn't give up, it would be her. From that moment on, Emma threw herself into the search for Liam. She contacted the foster care system, trying to find out where Liam was now. But the social workers only gave her vague answers. Information about children in the foster care system is confidential. We cannot disclose Liam's location without a valid reason. She tried explaining that Ethan was his biological brother, that reuniting the two brothers was crucial, but the rigid regulations didn't allow for any exceptions. Emma felt frustration rise within her, but she didn't give up. She began searching for clues in other ways. She joined forums for adoptive families, reaching out to those who had been through the process of finding lost family members within the foster care system. She connected with former social workers who might know something about Liam's case. Emma held the phone in her hand, the cold sensation of the metal seeping into her palm. Her heart raced, not out of fear, but because she knew this call could decide everything. She had spent weeks searching for information, following the faint traces of Liam, and now she had found the contact number for the children's shelter where the boy had once lived. But Emma wasn't naive. She knew the foster care system had strict rules. She was ready, but would they help her? She dialed the number, pressing the phone to her ear. The ringing stretched on, a test of patience. Then, a voice on the other end. Children's Care Center. How may I assist you? Emma took a deep breath, trying to maintain a calm and professional tone. Hello, this is Emma Patterson. I'm fostering a boy named Ethan Carter, and I've recently discovered that he has a biological brother named Liam Carter. I was hoping to find out if there's any way for the two brothers to reconnect. A brief silence followed. Then the woman's voice returned, distant. I'm sorry, but information about children in the foster care system is confidential. We cannot disclose personal information without a legitimate reason. Emma had anticipated this response. She patiently continued. I understand the regulations, but this is a special case. The two children were separated when Ethan was just 3 years old. He still remembers his brother and wants to meet him again. I'm not asking for any personal details, just whether it would be possible to arrange a meeting or send a letter to Liam. The woman sighed, as if she had heard similar requests hundreds of times before. I'm very sorry, but we cannot do that. Liam is currently living with another family, and unless that family reaches out to us, we are not permitted to disclose anything about him. Emma felt an invisible door slam shut in front of her. She knew that the system operated under strict privacy protections, but it didn't lessen the injustice Ethan and Liam were facing. They shouldn't have been separated in the first place. She didn't give up. So, can I send a letter for Liam through the center? Or at least leave my contact information so that Liam's foster family can reach out to me if they wish? The woman paused, then responded, according to the regulations, we cannot initiate contact between families without permission from both sides. If Liam's current family wants to make contact, they would need to reach out to you first. Emma clenched her fist. She felt utterly defeated. No matter how valid her reason was, no matter how deeply she could feel Ethan's pain, to the system, she was just an outsider. Cold administrative rules were blocking a reunion that should never have been torn apart in the first place. Miss Patterson, the woman continued, her tone softening slightly, as though sensing Emma's desperation, I truly understand your desire, but I cannot violate regulations. If you can prove that Liam is in danger, or there's an urgent issue related to his welfare, we can reconsider the case. But if it's just for emotional or personal reasons, I'm afraid you won't be able to access Liam's information. Emma took a deep breath, trying to hold back her anger. I understand. Thank you for your time. She hung up the phone, placing it down on the desk and leaning back in the chair, closing her eyes. A feeling of helplessness washed over her. The system was created to protect children, but sometimes it became a barrier that kept those children from ever finding true happiness. David walked into the room, noticing the tense expression on his wife's face. He sat beside her. Did they say no? Emma shook her head, a hollow smile on her lips. They said if Liam's foster family doesn't reach out first, they can't provide any information. David frowned. So, what now? We can't let Ethan keep living with this longing. Emma opened her eyes and stared into the space ahead. She didn't know what to do next, but one thing was certain. She wouldn't give up. This wall of bureaucracy might be high and cold, but she would find a way to get over it. If the system wouldn't help her, she would find her own path. She needed a different approach, someone who could help her go around the system, a compassionate social worker, someone who understood that sometimes the rules weren't everything. But how would she find that person? Emma stared at her computer screen, then opened a search engine. If Liam had been moved through several different homes, surely someone would remember him. A former social worker, a teacher, someone who had worked within the foster care system. She didn't know if this would bring her closer to finding Liam, but one thing she knew for sure: her search had only just begun. Emma couldn't accept the answer from the foster care center. She knew that the administrative rules were good at protecting children's privacy, but they had inadvertently separated children who should have been together. She couldn't let Ethan grow up without answers. She couldn't let him live forever in the longing for a brother he might never see again. If the system wouldn't help her, she would find Liam on her own. She started her search by reaching out to child advocacy organizations and foster parent support groups. She joined online forums where adopted families shared experiences and helped each other. She posted, telling the story of Ethan and Liam, hoping someone who knew the boy might provide a clue. In the early days, the responses were not promising. Most people in the group sympathized with her story, but they knew how difficult it was to search for a child in the foster care system without official information. Some advised her to hire a lawyer, but that could take years and cost a fortune. Not giving up, Emma began to reach out directly to social workers. She searched for a list of people who had worked with children in the system, followed up on old reports, and contacted anyone who might have met Liam. She went to welfare offices, talking to anyone willing to listen. One morning, she drove to a youth support center in the suburbs. The center specialized in helping young people who had been in the foster care system and were now trying to rebuild their lives. If Liam had been there, someone might still remember him. Upon entering, she was greeted by a middle-aged woman. Her name tag read Linda Parker, social worker. Emma felt a spark of hope, knowing that people in this line of work often had compassion and might be willing to help. "Hello, how can I help you?" Linda asked, her tone warm but professional. Emma took a deep breath. "I'm looking for a boy named Liam Carter. I'm the foster mother of his younger brother, Ethan. The two brothers were separated when they were little, and I want to find a way to reunite them." Linda furrowed her brow, flipping through a file on her desk. "Liam Carter? That name sounds familiar. How old is he now?" Emma quickly replied, "Around 10 years old. I'm not sure where he is now, but I know he's been moved through several different foster families." Linda was silent for a moment, as if trying to remember something. Then she looked at Emma, her gaze softening with a hint of sympathy. "I remember a boy named Liam who was brought here, but he didn't stay long. He was very quiet, seemed like he didn't trust anyone, and I believe he was moved shortly after that. Let me check the records." Emma's heart pounded. She waited, feeling time slow down. Linda turned on her computer and searched the internal system. A moment later, she stopped, her eyes focused on the screen. "There is a Liam Carter in our records. He was here for 3 months before being moved to a foster family in the west side of the city. But since then, I don't have any further information about him." Emma struggled to stay calm, but her heart swelled with emotion. She had come closer. "Do you know who the foster family is? Can I contact them?" Linda shook her head. "I'm afraid I can't provide personal information about the family, but if you'd like, I can send a request to the social welfare agency asking if they could arrange a meeting between the two brothers." Emma clenched her fist. She knew this wasn't the answer she had hoped for, but at least it was a step forward. She nodded. "Yes, please. I'm willing to do whatever it takes for Ethan to be reunited with his brother." Linda smiled, noting Emma's information. "I'll do my best, but you should also prepare yourself, as this process may take some time." Emma understood, but she also knew that she couldn't stop now. She had found an important lead, and she wouldn't stop until she found Liam. After months of relentless searching, Emma finally received an important lead. Endless phone calls, emails sent with no response, personal visits to social workers that only resulted in vague answers. Everything she had tried seemed in vain. But then, one gloomy autumn afternoon, a phone call changed everything. The caller was Linda Parker, the social worker Emma had met a few weeks earlier at the youth support center. Her voice was slightly tense, but full of hope. "Emma, I have news about Liam Carter, but can you come meet me in person? I think you should hear this from me." Emma didn't need to hear more. She immediately dropped everything and drove to the center in under 20 minutes. When she entered Linda's office, the social worker was sitting before a thick file, her eyes deep in thought. "Where's Liam?" Emma asked as soon as she sat down, her voice trembling with anticipation. Linda sighed and pushed the file toward her. The boy has been through 3 different foster homes in just 1 year. No place was ever really home for him. Emma's heart sank. A child moved around so often never had the chance to form strong bonds with anyone. He never had the stability, the sense of security, nor the protection that every child deserves. Linda continued. The most recent family gave up custody of Liam a month ago. They said he was too distant, wouldn't open up, was constantly defensive, and didn't trust anyone. So, Liam was returned to the foster care system. But the problem is, she paused, her eyes showing clear concern. Emma held her breath. What is it? Linda looked her in the eye. If no one adopts him in the next 3 months, Liam will be sent to a group home for older children. Emma felt a cold shiver run down her spine. A group home was not a family. It was a place for older children who had aged out of the system, a place where they were funneled into a system that offered little chance of ever finding a real home. There, children grew up without guidance, with no one truly caring for their future. She couldn't let that happen. Emma took a deep breath, her resolve igniting. What can I do to prevent that? Linda stared at her for a long moment before replying. You could propose to be Liam's temporary guardian, but the process is very complicated. You'll have to go through a series of evaluations, and the most important thing is that Liam has to agree. He's been hurt a lot, and I'm not sure he'll trust anyone easily. Emma swallowed hard. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that if she did nothing, Liam would be thrust into an indifferent system that he might never escape from. She clenched her fists, her eyes filled with determination. I want to meet him. Linda nodded. I'll arrange a meeting. But Emma, you have to understand. Liam is no longer a 3-year-old. He's been through so much pain, and you'll have to be incredibly patient to get him to trust again. Emma smiled, but in her heart, she knew this was just the beginning of a challenging journey. But no matter what happened, she wouldn't give up. Not now. Not ever. For years, Ethan had lived with hazy memories of his brother, fragmented images of an older boy who had always been by his side, always protecting him from nightmares. But those memories were like a picture fading with time. Would Liam still remember him when they met? Would they still be brothers like before? That question kept echoing in Ethan's mind, keeping him awake through the night. Emma had sat beside him, gently rubbing his back, telling him soothing stories to help him fall asleep. But Ethan's eyes remained wide open, filled with a storm of emotions. Tomorrow, you'll meet your brother again, Emma whispered. Ethan turned over, his dark eyes sparkling in the soft glow of the nightlight. What if he doesn't remember me? Emma's heart tightened. She knew Ethan was trying to hide his fear, but his small voice betrayed everything. Your brother will remember you, Ethan, she said softly, brushing his hair. Love isn't something that's easily forgotten. Ethan didn't say anything more, just nodded lightly before slowly closing his eyes. But even in sleep, his small hand still held the teddy bear tightly, as if it were the only thing that could make him feel safe. The next morning, Ethan was the first to wake up. He had dressed himself neatly, his curly hair tousled, but his face shining with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. When Emma walked in, he immediately turned to her, his eyes bright. Can we go meet Liam now? Emma smiled, bending down to straighten his collar. We'll go right now, my love. He nodded eagerly, but Emma noticed that his small hands were gripping his shirt tightly, a sign of his nervousness. They got into the car, and for most of the drive, Ethan didn't say much. He sat quietly, gazing out the window, fiddling with the teddy bear's ear. Emma had noticed that he did this whenever he was anxious. Are you nervous? Emma asked gently. Ethan nodded but didn't turn to face her. He kept looking out, as if searching for something in the slowly drifting clouds above. It's okay, sweetheart, Emma reassured him. No matter what happens, I'm here with you. It was then that Ethan finally turned to her, his eyes filled with a slight sense of relief. But as the car came to a stop in front of the park's entrance, Emma felt the small body beside her tense up. The park was busy today. Children were running around, their laughter filling the air. But for Ethan, it seemed like all the sounds faded into the background. He didn't get out of the car right away. He just sat there, staring at the park's entrance, his eyes filled with anticipation but also doubt. Do you think he'll come, Mom? His voice was so soft that Emma almost didn't hear it. She squeezed his hand gently, trying to reassure him. Your brother's on his way. Let's wait together. Ethan nodded, but his small hand trembled slightly. He didn't jump out of the car like a child excited to reunite with a loved one after so many years. Instead, he sat still, his eyes fixed on the entrance, as though afraid that if he stepped out, everything would turn out to be just a dream that could disappear at any moment. Emma knelt down and gently placed her hands on Ethan's shoulders. Can I have a hug? Without hesitation, he threw himself into her arms, holding on as if afraid of something he couldn't put into words. Emma could feel the irregular rhythm of his heart. "It's okay, sweetie. I'm right here." Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his wide eyes scanning the crowd, his tension palpable as he searched through every face, every figure, as if fearing that if he blinked, he would miss the most important moment of his life. Then, suddenly, he stopped. In the distance, near a row of benches under a large oak tree, stood a familiar figure, a boy, slightly taller than Ethan, skinny, his hair a bit messy, his dark brown eyes filled with a mix of skepticism and emotion. He wore a faded jacket, his hands stuffed into his pockets. But those eyes, the eyes Ethan could never forget, were staring directly at him. Ethan felt his breath catch in his chest. The world around him seemed to go silent. The sounds of the park, the laughter, the rustling leaves, the distant hum of traffic, all fading away. Then, without thinking, without hesitation, he shouted, "Liam." And in that very moment, Ethan's small legs propelled him forward. He ran as fast as he could, arms spread wide, the teddy bear falling to the ground unnoticed. All Ethan knew was that he had to get to his brother, to feel his warmth after all these years of separation. Liam didn't stand still either. He pulled his hands out of his pockets, picked up his pace, and as if swept up by a wave of emotion, he too rushed toward Ethan. And then, in the middle of the sunlit park, surrounded by strangers who had no idea who they were, the two brothers embraced. Ethan buried his face in Liam's shoulder, his small hands gripping his brother's back as if terrified that if he let go, Liam would vanish. His breath came in gasps, his chest heaving with the surge of emotions. Liam held Ethan tightly, his thin arms strong yet tender, like a shield guarding his younger brother. He closed his eyes, feeling Ethan's presence, the warmth of his breath, the tremor of his emotions, the same brother he had thought of all these years. "I thought I'd never see you again." Liam's voice was hoarse, mingling with his trembling breath. Ethan didn't answer right away. He only tightened his grip, as if to prove that this wasn't a dream. Emma stood nearby, tears quietly falling. She had waited for this moment throughout months of searching, but nothing could have prepared her for the emotions of witnessing these two children, two brothers who had been torn apart for so long, finally finding each other. Everything around her became meaningless. No more administrative barriers, no more tedious paperwork, no more endless waiting and despair. Only the two brothers, finally reunited. Ethan lifted his head, his eyes wet with tears, but his face broke into a wide, joyful smile. "You still remember me, right?" Liam looked at him, a tearful smile forming on his face. "How could I ever forget you?" At that moment, Ethan cried, not out of sadness, but out of happiness. He hugged Liam again, this time more gently, but with complete fulfillment. In the distance, the last rays of the afternoon sun bathed them, casting a warm glow over the two brothers, as if the whole universe was witnessing and celebrating this moment. Ethan buried his face into his brother's thin shoulder, feeling the warmth he had longed for all these years. His breath trembled, and silent tears rolled down his cheeks, soaking Liam's jacket. But he didn't let go. He was afraid that if he loosened his grip even for a moment, his brother would disappear like a beautiful dream swept away in the mist. Liam held Ethan tightly, his eyes red but determined to keep his brother safe in his arms. His small shoulders trembled, as though he was trying to hold back the flood of emotions surging within him. Over the years, he had learned to hide his feelings, to tell himself he had to be strong, to stand on his own. But right now, with his little brother holding him tight, Liam knew he didn't have to pretend anymore. He had found the most important part of his life again, the little brother he had once promised to protect with his life. No one said anything. They just stood there, holding each other for what seemed like an eternity in the middle of the busy park, ignoring the curious stares around them. To them, the world seemed to shrink down to just the two of them. Ethan let out a soft sob but still wouldn't let go of Liam. He lifted his head, his tear-filled eyes sparkling with happiness. "You still remember me, right?" Liam gazed deep into his brother's eyes, as if trying to etch this moment into his heart. A tearful smile spread across his face. "I've never forgotten you, Ethan." Just those words carried a universe of love and pain, years of waiting and despair, of wondering if his beloved brother even remembered him. Ethan cried, but these weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of overwhelming happiness. Emma stood nearby, her own tears flowing down her cheeks. She had imagined this moment so many times, but nothing could have prepared her for the emotions of witnessing these two children, these two brothers who had been separated for so long, finally reunited. She looked at Liam, a boy with eyes older than his years, with small shoulders that had borne so much pain. Then she looked at Ethan, the boy she had raised, protected, but who had always carried a space in his heart that no one else could fill. That space had now been filled. Emma knew she had done the right thing. The months of searching, the bureaucratic wall, the disappointments from being turned away, every hardship had been worth it for this moment. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. If she truly wanted these brothers to stay together forever, there was still so much to be done. She couldn't let Liam continue to be bounced from one family to the next. She couldn't let him live in a place where no one truly cared for him. She had to find a way to bring him home, back to Ethan. But would Liam be ready for that? After all these years of abandonment, would he have enough trust to accept a new home? Emma looked at Liam, watching as he held his brother tightly, as if afraid that if he let go, he would lose Ethan once again. She knew without a doubt she wouldn't let that happen. Emma had thought that the moment the two brothers reunited would be the hardest part of this journey. But she was wrong. Bringing Liam back to Ethan wasn't just an emotional matter. It was a complex legal battle. Right after the emotional meeting in the park, Emma knew she couldn't let Liam continue to live in uncertainty. The boy deserved a family, a real home, and no one could love and protect him more than Ethan. But when Emma contacted the welfare agency about adopting Liam, she quickly realized that the path ahead wasn't going to be easy. Liam's current foster family, the one he had been living with for a few months, was reluctant to let him go. Not because they truly wanted to adopt him, but because they didn't want to deal with the bureaucratic hassle of transferring a child. To them, Liam was just another part of the system, a responsibility they had taken on as a contract with the government. Emma sat in a meeting room at the welfare agency, facing two caseworkers. One of them, Margaret Lewis, was responsible for Liam's file. She seemed like a woman of principle, not fond of sudden changes. "Mrs. Patterson, I understand your wishes," Margaret said, her tone somewhat stiff. "But the adoption process is not something that can be decided overnight. Liam is currently in a temporary foster home, and without a valid reason to move him, we cannot approve your request." Emma gripped her hands tightly on the table, trying to remain calm. "I'm not asking for a hasty transfer. I'm asking for a real family for this boy. Liam and Ethan are brothers, and these children should never have been separated in the first place." Margaret flipped through Liam's file, scanning the dense information before shaking her head. "I understand the bond between the two brothers, but our concern is ensuring that Liam has the most stable environment possible. Moving him to a new family, even if it's with his biological brother, isn't something we can approve immediately." Emma took a deep breath. "Does Liam's current foster family even want to adopt him?" Margaret hesitated, then answered, "Not really. They just want to keep things as they are until a better solution presents itself." Emma felt a surge of anger rise within her. A better solution? What could be better than reuniting Liam with his brother, with someone who truly loves him? She stared at Margaret. "The boy has lived in 3 different foster homes in the past year. I don't think keeping things as they are is what's best for Liam. He needs a real home, not a temporary pit stop." Margaret sighed, flipping through a few more pages in the file. "I can't make a decision right now. There will be a meeting between the social workers and Liam's current foster family to discuss this possibility. But you need to understand that ultimately, the final decision lies with the court. Adoption can't just be based on emotions." Emma clenched her hands so tightly that her nails dug into her skin. "So what do I need to do to adopt Liam?" Margaret looked at her for a long moment before replying, "You need to prove that you are legally, financially, and emotionally capable of caring for Liam. And most importantly, Liam has to agree." Emma froze. She had put everything into finding Liam, into bringing him back to Ethan. But would Liam want that? The boy had been abandoned so many times, moved from one place to another. Did he still have enough trust to step into a new family? She took a deep breath. She knew this battle wouldn't be easy. But if there was one thing she had learned from Ethan, it was this. Family isn't just where you're born, it's where you're loved. Emma looked straight at Margaret, her eyes full of resolve. "I will do whatever it takes to prove that Liam belongs with my family, and I will not give up." Margaret Lewis pursed her lips and nodded. "All right, Mrs. Patterson, prove it." The real battle had only just begun. Emma had never been one to give up easily. She had already been through too much to reach this point, finding Liam, reuniting the brothers. And now, she couldn't let any obstacle take away their chance to be together. If the system wanted her to prove that love can outweigh rigid rules, she was ready to do just that. The morning after her meeting with Margaret Lewis, Emma contacted a lawyer who specialized in foster care adoption cases. Jonathan Miller, an experienced attorney who had helped many families fight to adopt children from the foster care system. Sitting in Jonathan's office, Emma explained the entire story. She spoke about Ethan, about how the boy had lived with a longing for his brother for years. She spoke about Liam, about how he had been moved through several different foster families, never finding a place he could truly call home. And she spoke about the reunion, the moment when she knew that both of these children needed each other more than anything else in the world. Jonathan listened, then sighed. Emma, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I'll be blunt with you. The system doesn't change easily. Social workers won't like the idea of breaking protocol just because of emotions. Emma nodded, but her gaze showed no hesitation. So what do I need to do to make sure they don't have any reason to deny me? Jonathan looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. I like your fighting spirit. All right, we'll start by gathering all the necessary documents. Emma dove into the work immediately. She knew she not only needed to prove that she could be a good mother to Liam, but also that the system had made a mistake by separating the brothers in the first place. She gathered financial records, proving that she had the means to support both children. Medical records ensured that both Ethan and Liam were in good health, while also emphasizing the psychological harm Liam had suffered due to being moved around so much. For letters of support, Emma reached out to Ethan's teacher, the social worker who had worked with Liam, even a therapist who had evaluated Ethan, asking them to write letters affirming that the bond between the brothers was irreplaceable. Emma also spent time documenting Ethan's positive changes since reuniting with his brother in Ethan's care journal, how he laughed more, slept better, and no longer had the frequent nightmares he used to. Each document, each letter, each piece of evidence she collected became a brick in the wall she was building to protect the brothers. But all of that would be meaningless if Liam didn't want to come home. One evening, Emma sat next to Liam as he played with Ethan, assembling a puzzle. She watched them, feeling the invisible yet strong bond between them. Liam, she said softly. He looked up, his gaze wary, a habit he had developed after years in the system. Can I ask you something? Liam nodded, his hands still absently holding puzzle pieces. If you could choose, would you want to stay with Ethan? Liam paused. He looked over at his brother, who was focused on fitting the pieces together. Ethan didn't say anything, but Emma could see his small hand tighten around the pieces, as if holding his breath, waiting for the answer. Liam took a deep breath. I've lived in many places, he said quietly. No one has kept me for long. But Ethan is my family. Ethan looked up, his eyes bright like stars. Will you stay with me? His voice was small, but full of hope. Liam looked into his brother's eyes, then nodded. I want to. Emma's throat tightened. She knew this wasn't an easy answer for Liam. He had lost so much in his life, grown accustomed to being moved around, being torn away without having a say in the matter. But now, for the first time, he had a choice, and he chose Ethan. With all the evidence in hand, Emma and Jonathan filed a petition in court for legal guardianship of Liam. But they knew this battle was far from over. The Child Welfare Agency wouldn't make changes easily, and Liam's current foster family might oppose it. But this time, Emma wasn't fighting alone. She had Ethan. She had Liam. And above all, she had a rightful reason to never give up. She wasn't just fighting to adopt Liam. She was fighting to ensure these brothers would never be separated again. In the early days of living with Emma and Ethan, Liam remained a skeptical boy. He wasn't used to having a real home. He had been moved from one house to another too many times, shifting from one environment to the next, each time being forced to adapt only to be left behind once again. Liam didn't believe in beautiful things. He didn't trust stability, nor did he believe that anyone would truly stay by his side. That's why, despite Emma offering all her love to welcome him, he still kept his distance at first. Even though they lived under the same roof, he behaved like a guest. During meals, he sat upright, holding his spoon carefully, as if waiting for someone to come and tell him that he didn't belong there. When Ethan eagerly shared stories about school, Liam remained silent, listening but not participating. And when Emma asked if he wanted anything, he just shook his head, as though afraid that if he accepted anything, he would owe her something in return. But bit by bit, the wall Liam had built began to crack. One evening, as Emma was cleaning up the kitchen after dinner, she heard soft laughter coming from the living room. She stepped out and saw Ethan trying to make Liam laugh by pulling funny faces, while Liam sat there, not laughing loudly, but the corners of his mouth curling up involuntarily. It was the first time Emma had seen him truly relaxed since he had arrived. Days passed, and Liam continued to change. He no longer ate in silence. He began asking about the dishes, sharing which foods he liked. One time, when Emma made lasagna, Liam hesitated for a long time before whispering, "My real mom used to make this." Emma looked at him, her heart aching, but she smiled and said, "Well, let's see if mine tastes the same." Liam finished his portion that day, but didn't say anything else. Still, Emma knew that it was an important moment. Liam also no longer just listened to Ethan talk. He started to participate, began telling his own stories, small tales about the places he had been, about the times he and Ethan were younger, or even thoughts he had never shared with anyone. One night, as Emma passed by the room where the two brothers were, she heard soft voices. She stopped outside the door, not wanting to break the moment. "Do you think we'll always be together?" Ethan asked, his voice tiny. Liam was silent for a while, then softly replied, "I don't know, but I want to." Ethan smiled sleepily. "Then I think we will." Emma stood outside the door, tears threatening to fall. The trauma Liam had endured couldn't disappear after just a few days or weeks. But little by little, he was changing. He was learning to trust. He was learning to love again. And most importantly, he was learning to believe that he deserved a family. That morning, Emma woke up earlier than usual. She went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, but her hands trembled slightly as she poured the coffee. Today would be the most important day in the lives of her, Ethan, and Liam. The day when the court would decide whether she could officially adopt Liam. In the bedroom, Ethan and Liam had also woken up early. Ethan was excited, but Liam was different. The boy was silent, his gaze reflecting a hint of worry. "Do you think the judge will agree?" Ethan asked as the two brothers dressed. Liam didn't answer right away. He straightened the collar of his shirt, looking at himself in the mirror. "I don't know," he said softly. Ethan took his brother's hand, his eyes filled with determination. "But you want to stay with me, right?" Liam looked at his younger brother, then nodded. More than anything, the three of them got in the car and drove to the courthouse. Emma sat behind the wheel, glancing at the two boys through the rearview mirror. Ethan was holding Liam's hand tightly, as if not wanting to let him go for even a second. Liam sat quietly, his eyes filled with thought. When they arrived, Emma led the boys inside. The courtroom was large and imposing, but to Liam, it felt colder than anywhere he had ever been. This was the place that would decide whether he could have a real family. The judge, a graying man, entered and began reviewing the documents in front of him. He slowly turned each page of Liam's file, his sharp eyes examining every detail. The silence in the room was so heavy that they could almost hear each other's heartbeats. After a while, the judge looked up, his gaze settling on Liam. "Before I make my decision, do you have anything to say?" he asked. The room fell silent. Emma squeezed Ethan's hand, looking at Liam with an encouraging gaze. She knew this was the defining moment, and it all depended on the boy. Liam swallowed, his hand unconsciously gripping the hem of his shirt. He looked around the cold room, the strangers, the thick file of his life. But then his gaze landed on Emma and Ethan, the mother who had fought tirelessly to bring him home, the little brother who had been waiting for the day the two of them could be together forever. Liam took a deep breath, standing up. He looked straight into the judge's eyes, his voice clear but still trembling. "They love us, and I love them." He paused for a moment before continuing, his voice now more certain. "If I could make one wish, I just want to be loved by these people for the rest of my life." The room was so quiet you could hear the breath of everyone present. Emma put her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Ethan tightened his grip on her hand, his eyes full of hope. The judge stared at Liam for a long time. Then, something unexpected happened. He smiled. The judge nodded slowly, closing the file in front of him. He looked at Emma, then at Liam and Ethan. "I don't need to say anything more," he said, his voice full of understanding. "The adoption is approved." Emma broke into tears, unable to hold back her emotions anymore. She rushed to embrace both boys, feeling the warmth of them in her arms. Ethan beamed with joy, jumping up to hug both his mother and his brother. As for Liam, the boy who had once been skeptical, afraid, and thought he didn't belong anywhere, he now closed his eyes, letting tears fall down his cheeks. But this time, they were tears of happiness. He had a family, forever. The social workers in the room couldn't hide their emotions either. Even the judge, who had witnessed hundreds of adoption cases, nodded to Emma as a silent acknowledgement. As the three of them stepped out of the courthouse, the warm sunlight bathed them. Ethan held Liam's hand tightly, showing no intention of letting go. "You know," Ethan said, his smile bright. "Now you're my official big brother." Liam laughed, a real laugh, full of happiness. "I've always been your big brother, little guy." Emma looked at her two sons, her heart full of happiness. Their journey had been full of hardships, but in the end, they had become a real family. Do you believe in the power of love? A love strong enough to overcome all barriers, patient enough to heal wounds, and genuine enough to change someone's life forever? If this story has touched your heart, hit subscribe now so you won't miss the next emotional stories. And remember, a family isn't just made from blood, it's made from hearts willing to love one another. Sometimes the most important people in our lives are those who choose to be with us, not those who gave birth to us. Have you ever witnessed a story like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below.